breaking news we're following right out of Chicago. We have the video of a Chicago cop shooting and killing an unarmed black teenager. We're working on bringing that to you momentarily. This video is just now coming out after 3 years because the city had fought its release, even as officials vowed to be more transparent. But today, a federal judge ruled that the video should be released immediately and scolded the city and the mayor for how the case has been handled. CNN's Rosa Flores is following this story from Chicago. You have seen the video. Tell us about it, Rosa.
Well, Pamela, it comes down to 10 seconds of video, and let me take you through this because what you see initially is Cedric Chapman getting out of his vehicle and start a sprint away from police. Now you can see that he squeezes between two cars and there's a police officer trailing right behind him. He's just a few feet away from Chapman. Then a few seconds transpire and you see the other police officer, the shooting police officer, actually aiming as Chapman. And again, this happens very quickly in about 10 seconds. And then after that, all you see, once the angle of that camera changes, you see Chapman on the ground. But Pamela, I've got to tell you, we've heard this story
cleaned it
before.
up.
The description of the video, this is the first time that we're actually seeing this video. And Pamela, I've got to tell you, one of the
Man, we just
the most
chasing after Shorty.
Is
just fucking Shorty. That's crazy.
You keep playing this, you see the police officer place his foot on top of the body. Now, we're talking to an investigator who was actually fired after he decided that this was not a justified shooting. He tells us that what happened after is the officer handcuffed Chapman, and then what you see in that video is that this police officer places his foot on top of his body.
So walk us through this again, because we just saw some clips of it, but I personally had a hard time kind of figuring out what was going on. So Chapman was essentially running away from the police. Can we bring that video back up, guys, just to kind of walk through it? Okay, so what do we see right here? Is that the police officer going after him with the gun drawn, right?
So what you see, and I can take you back through this. So Chapman is a carjacking suspect. So these two police officers arrive next to him at that stoplight. So that light is red. Chapman is in a vehicle, and so these police officers get out of the vehicle with their guns drawn. Chapman sees this. He gets out of the car, out of his vehicle, and starts running away from police officers. Now you see him kind of squeeze in between two vehicles, and there's a police officer right behind him. That police officer is still following him as Chapman continues running on the sidewalk, and then he's going to turn the corner there. And now, again, a part of this we don't quite see because the framing of that shot changes, but you do see the shooting police officer, and he is with his gun drawn, following Chapman, and then you see that officer at the intersection, and then once the angle of that camera changes, you do see Chapman on the ground and the other police officer with his foot on top of his body. Now, we got to tell the officer side of the story here, of course, Pamela. These officers have said that they feared for their lives, that they felt that Chapman turned around.
They fear for their life.
That, they were in fear for their life, and that he had a black object. Now, that black object was an iPhone box, and there was no weapon ever recovered on the scene other than, of course, that iPhone box that was that Chapman was holding and that was recovered later on the scene.
All right, I want to talk about this with the civil rights attorney Charles Coleman Jr. He's also a former prosecutor and trial attorney. The family of Cedric Chapman's push for this video to be released as part of a wrongful death lawsuit. The city had long opposed it while court hearings were underway, and then sort of did an about-face and wanted it to be released as of last night. What do you make of that? Was that the right thing to release it?
Well, Pam, I do think that it was the right thing to release the tape. However, the city's maneuvering around this issue really strikes me as being a lot of PR spin, because what they're trying to do, or what it seems like Mayor Emanuel's office is trying to do is, in lieu of all of the police shootings that we've seen Laquan McDonald, we've seen Ronald Johnson, and now we've seen this Cedric Chapman shooting. With all of these things that have happened, his office has taken a terrible hit with respect to police corruption and abuse of force in Chicago. And so what they're trying to do now is suggest, well, we want to be transparent, we want to be open with the community, but it really sort of seems like what he's trying to do is save face with the citizens of Chicago.
And were you able to watch the video that we just showed?
I did. I saw it, as one of the things that some of the lawyers for the city were arguing was that the video wasn't clear and that they wouldn't be able to make out what actually happened. And in his order, the judge was very clear. The judge was very irritated, number one, that the city sort of did this last minute about face. But in addition to that, the judge was
That's
also
on
clear
73rd,
that while
bro.
the video may not be entirely clear, you can certainly
That's on
see more
74th.
than what the
And
lawyers from the
what's
city of
that is?
Chicago were trying to suggest would be able
That's
to
like
be
over
seen
east.
on the video.
And the federal judge in this case that you just talked about, he did not mince words, calling the city of Chicago's action, quote, irresponsible in this case in a waste of taxpayers' money and the court's time. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that when you look at it in terms of what it is, judicial economy, in terms of how much this has cost the city, how much time and resources have gone into not only paying for the lawyers, not only fighting this case in court, but also just the logjam that it creates in the justice system in terms of the judge looking at this case, it is something that they should be scolded and reprimanded about, because if in fact it was about transparency, if in fact it was about the community and Chicago knowing what actually happened, then they could have released any sort of fight and stopped that early on. Instead, they wait until the 11th hour and they decide at that point that they're going to be okay with the video being released. So I do understand the judge's frustrations, and in this case, I'm inclined to agree. If this was the city of Chicago's position from the very beginning, then from the outset, then that should have been what it was that they were arguing.
Just quickly, and before I go back to Rosa to get Chicago public reaction, do you think, though, that the officers have a case here? Because they say that, look, we were running after this guy, he just stole a car, we believed he had a gun in his hand, and he turned around and we felt threatened for our lives.
You know, Pam, as a former prosecutor, I can tell you I've seen a lot of different things. And when I look at this video, when I hear the account of what is being said, it's very difficult for me to believe that these officers can articulate that they were in fear of their lives as the 17-year-old unarmed young black man is running away from them, and he's essentially shot in the back by police who had an opportunity to take aim at him and fire.
Only a
so I
cab
have a
would
really
shoot a
hard
motherfucker
time
in the back.
believing that, and I think that when you're looking at it in terms of the law, they can't or will have a lot of trouble articulating whatever it was that they saw as the perceived threat to their life that would cause them to unholster their firearm, draw their firearm, and then discharge their firearm to an unarmed young man. We talked about the fact that he thought he had a black object in his hand. They didn't know what it was. It was an iPhone box. So at the end of the day, I don't necessarily believe that these officers have much to stand on in terms of this shooting. And I agree with the officer in Chicago who suggested that they turn the ruling on this around, that this shooting was clearly unjustified.
All right, and I want to bring Rosa back in just to get the reaction in Chicago and also learn a little bit more about what the implications are now.
Well, Pamela, I think the implications are very high, because in this particular case, not only are we talking about an officer-involved shooting that was caught on tape like we've seen in other cases, but in this particular case, you've got an IPRA investigator, that's the Independent Police Review Authority, that investigates every officer-involved shooting. You've got an investigator who was fired because he says that he was going to deem this particular shooting unjustified, and he was asked to change it to justified. Now, that organization, the head of that organization is appointed by the mayor of Chicago. Now, after the Laquan McDonald shooting and the release of that video,